Margaret Holloway stood at the edge of the dirt road and stared at the sign that had gone up overnight. 3 words, printed in industrial black on a yellow background: Petroline Energy, active drilling site. Behind the chain-link fence, workers in hard hats moved across 67 acres of flat Oklahoma land that she had laughed about in open court 18 months earlier. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back 3 years. Daniel Holloway was 42 years old and had spent the better part of his adult life being overlooked. He was what people called a steady man, reliable, measured, the kind of civil engineer who showed up early and never raised his voice at the office. He had built bridges for a living. Somewhere along the way, Margaret had decided that described their marriage too. Load-bearing. Functional. Completely without beauty. He had met her at a friend's barbecue in Tulsa in the summer of 2009. She was 30 at the time, sharp-eyed and quick-talking, the kind of woman who makes a room feel like it was waiting for her. He fell in love with her directness. What he didn't understand until much later was that directness and ruthlessness tend to live at the same address. They had been married 14 years. No children. A dog named Clover. A 4-bedroom colonial in South Tulsa they had renovated together, weekend by weekend, over 3 summers. Daniel had loved those weekends. Margaret, he came to understand, had simply been running out of patience. The affair started with a man named Jordan Calloway, 35, pharmaceutical sales director, the kind of person who rented sports cars on weekends and told stories in which he was always the smartest person in the room. Daniel noticed the signs the way quiet men always notice things, carefully, without announcing it. The new passcode on Margaret's phone. The unfamiliar car parked on their street 2 Thursdays in a row. The way she had started laughing at something on her phone, alone, in the kitchen at midnight. He said nothing. He made one phone call, not to an attorney, not yet. He called Paul Greer, a geologist he had worked with on a drainage project 2 years earlier. Daniel had inherited 67 acres in rural Harmon County from his late uncle, flat, scrubby land near the Texas border with nothing on it but red dirt, dry grass, and an abandoned pump jack that hadn't moved since the 1980s. He had always been curious about what lay below the surface. Now seemed like a reasonable time to find out. The survey took 6 weeks and cost $4,200, paid from a personal checking account Margaret had never once looked at. When the report arrived, Daniel read it 3 times at his desk with his office door closed. On page 14, buried in language about seismic anomalies and Permian Basin stratigraphy, Paul Greer had written one sentence that Daniel underlined quietly with a pencil: formation characteristics at estimated 6,200-foot depth are consistent with recoverable hydrocarbon reserves. Recommend further investigation via test drilling. Daniel locked the manila folder in his desk drawer. He drove home. He made dinner. The confrontation came 2 months later, on a Tuesday evening in March. Daniel had left work early. Jordan Calloway's jacket was hanging on the kitchen chair. Margaret walked out of the bedroom and found Daniel standing in the hallway and did not flinch. "I haven't been happy for a long time," she said. "I want a divorce." She said it the way you return something you've grown tired of. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. She seemed almost unsettled by how little he resisted. The divorce proceedings were where the public performance truly began. Margaret had retained Karen Voss, a Tulsa family law attorney known for turning mediation into theater when it suited her client. The session was held in a conference room on the 4th floor of a downtown building, 8 people around a polished table, and Karen Voss moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had already decided the outcome. Margaret wanted the house, the colonial appraised at $482,000 that they had stripped to the studs and rebuilt together. She wanted the retirement accounts split evenly. She wanted the car. Her attorney moved through the asset list with crisp professionalism, pausing only to let each number settle in the room like a small judgment. When Karen Voss reached the rural parcel in Harmon County, 67 acres, county tax assessment $31,000, she waved a hand with something approaching dismissal. "My client is prepared to let Mr. Holloway retain the Harmon County land in exchange for a reduced claim on the retirement accounts," she announced. Margaret looked across the polished table at Daniel. She allowed herself a small smile. The kind that isn't really for the other person. "He always loved that dirt patch," she said to her attorney, just loud enough to carry across the room. "He can have every inch of it." Daniel's attorney leaned over and whispered a quick word of caution. Daniel shook his head slightly. "We accept," he said. Karen Voss and Margaret exchanged a glance. That glance had a very specific meaning: we just won. The paperwork was finalized within the week. Daniel walked out of that building with his truck, his dog, his savings account, and 67 acres of what his ex-wife would spend the following months describing, at dinner parties, with Jordan laughing loudest, as the dumbest real estate trade since the Dutch bought Manhattan. In reverse. She told the story often. She was very good at it. Her friends called it definitive proof that Daniel Holloway was, despite the engineering degree, fundamentally unserious about money. Daniel heard about the joke through a mutual friend. He did not respond. But what Margaret didn't know was that Daniel had already made a second phone call, this one to a land acquisition director at Petroline Energy in Oklahoma City, before the divorce papers had even been filed. 6 weeks after the settlement was signed, he drove 4 hours south and sat down with Greg Barton of Petroline in a roadside coffee shop in Harmon County. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. At the end of it, Daniel signed a 5-year mineral rights lease with a signing bonus of $185,000, and an 18% royalty rate on all extracted reserves. The funds landed in his personal account the following week. He took Clover for a long walk. He went to bed early. Test drilling began in October. Daniel drove out on a Saturday morning and stood at the fence line in work boots, watching the crew raise the derrick against the flat Oklahoma horizon like an iron monument. The foreman told him to expect preliminary results within 60 days. It took 41. The document that changed everything arrived in Daniel's email at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Harmon County, confirmed reserve estimates." He poured a cup of coffee before he opened it. He read the numbers once. Then again. Then he set the mug down and sat very still. Initial recoverable reserve, 1.4 million barrels of oil. Gross estimated value at current market pricing, $22.3 million. Full production to begin within 60 days. Clover put her head in his lap. He scratched behind her ears. Then he drove to work. The news traveled the way these things always do, through industry filings, a note in the Oklahoma Energy Journal, and finally a brief item in the Tulsa World Business section. A mutual acquaintance photographed the article on her phone and texted it to Margaret at 10:30 on a Thursday night. Margaret was at dinner with Jordan and 2 other couples. She picked up her phone, read the headline, and set it face down on the tablecloth. She told the table she wasn't feeling well. She went to the restroom and stood over the sink for a long time, staring at her own reflection. She called Daniel that night. He let it ring through to voicemail. He called her back 2 days later, sitting in the Petroline parking lot after a morning production meeting. He kept his voice even. He kept it brief. "Daniel, you ran that survey during our marriage. The underlying asset value is marital property under Oklahoma law and we have clear grounds to." Margaret. He waited a beat. "You had 2 attorneys in that conference room. The judge signed the settlement. The land was transferred to me free and clear with no outstanding claims. I had 3 attorneys review every line of that agreement before I accepted it. You knew what was under there, she said. I knew there was potential, he said. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing was guaranteed. A silence stretched across the line. You planned this from the beginning. He considered the word for a moment. I did my due diligence, he said. There's a meaningful difference. The line stayed quiet long enough that he thought she might have hung up. I called you boring, she said finally. Her voice was smaller now. I actually sat at dinner parties and called you boring. For years. I know, he said. Take care of yourself, Margaret. And he ended the call. Karen Voss filed a motion to reopen the asset proceedings within the month, arguing concealment of material information during the divorce. The motion had emotional weight and very little legal foundation. The geophysical survey had been paid entirely from Daniel's personal account, documented separately from all joint finances throughout the marriage. The Harmon County land had been inherited from his uncle before the marriage, not acquired during it. The settlement had been signed by both parties with full legal representation on both sides, and Margaret had done so willingly. Daniel's team had prepared for this moment for nearly a year. The motion was denied in 61 days. The appeal was dismissed 4 months after that. Jordan was gone by spring. He told Margaret he wasn't looking for anything serious. The house, the $482,000 colonial she had fought so hard for in that conference room, turned out to have a significant structural crack along the east foundation wall, discovered during a routine inspection. The repair estimate came in at $63,000. Daniel bought 40 acres of ranch property near the Harmon County site and had a modest house built on it. He hired a small property management firm. He kept his engineering job. He wasn't ready to stop building things. He saw Margaret once more, 14 months after the oil story had broken, at a mutual friend's retirement party in a downtown Tulsa ballroom. He spotted her across the room and considered leaving before she noticed him. She noticed him first. She crossed the floor and stopped a few feet away. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in many years. Something that looked, for the first time, like genuine honesty. You were always the most patient person I knew, she said quietly. I mistook it for weakness. He didn't perform forgiveness. He didn't perform vindication either. He simply looked at her with the expression of a man who had nothing left to prove. I hope you're doing all right, Margaret, he said. Then he turned and walked to the bar, ordered a bourbon, and stood at the window looking out at the city he had never once considered leaving. The story of Daniel Holloway is not really a story about oil. It is a story about what happens when a person stops performing their own smallness for the benefit of people who need them to stay small. He did not plan revenge. He planned a future. The justice was incidental. What would you have done in Daniel's place? Drop your answer in the comments.